Hello everyone and welcome to another Scotsway podcast, and it's the third of our Bloody Scotland podcasts, and this time round we're going to be talking about the McIlvanney Prize for the Scottish Crime Book of the Year, because at the moment I'm joined by three of the shortlisted finalists. Calum McSorley, hello Calum.
Yeah.
Robbie Morrison, hello Robbie.
Hi Alistair, Calum and Craig.
Russell. Yes, and Craig as well. How are you, Craig?
Hi, Alistair.
Well, first of all, congratulations to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I should let listeners know that I will be talking to Denise Mina, who's the fourth finalist. So don't hang up once we've finished talking, because there is more after that. But first of all, before we talk about the prize and talk about Bloody Scotland and go into further detail, I think it'd be a good idea if you could give us a brief synopsis of your shortlisted novels. Calum, I know you've done this before for us, but could you give us a brief synopsis of Squeaky Clean?
So Squeaky Clean is set in a car wash in the East End and is about Davy, who works there, and one day to get to a court date on time, he borrows a customer's car, and on the way there he gets carjacked and the car is destroyed. And unfortunately for him, it turns out that this car belongs to a dangerous gangster called Paolo, and he now owes him a lot of money. And potentially helping Davy out is a detective called Ali McCoist, who is something of a bungler and is trying to kind of find her way to redemption.
And that's a very interesting choice, which I think we'll talk about more later. And it is set, it's contemporary Glasgow, isn't it? That's what I said. But
yeah,
it's pre-COVID.
Yeah, I started it pre-COVID, and though I finished it after COVID, I didn't really want to get involved in that.
I think that's probably quite right. And Robbie, Edge of the Grave, what can you tell us about that?
Edge of the Grave is my second novel in the Inspector Jimmy Dreghorn series. It's set in 1933 Glasgow and opens with the discovery of a body on a narrowboat on the Forth and Clyde Canal, which is very quickly discovered by the discovery of another body, both shot through the head execution style. And as Jimmy Dreghorn and his sergeant, Bonnie Archie McDade, investigate, they discover that both of the corpses were ex-Black and Tans, who were members of a so-called peacekeeping force sent into Ireland during the War of Independence. While they're involved in that investigation, it also transpires that there's a rumoured IRA cell operating embedded in some of the sectarian gangs in Glasgow at the time, and they're also pursuing stolen explosives, which have been stolen from a colliery presumably for use in a sabotage campaign. And things get more complex and more dangerous, and our detectives find themselves in the middle of the IRA and Special Branch, and basically trying to do what's right, and stay alive towards the end of it.
And it's interesting because although it's set back in the day in Glasgow, there's still echoes of that time today. You know, there's still certain things that which are mentioned, which people will be able to recognise today, definitely, particularly if you're from Glasgow.
Oh yeah, no, I'd like to think so. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously the whole sectarian thing has calmed down from there, but I'd like to think it's people don't change, even though the times are different. But people themselves and their motivations and their compassion, their cruelty, I think people pretty much stay the same. And I think Glasgow is, while the city's very different from the 1930s, there's a great deal of recognisable elements are still there, even though I think what strikes me most often when I've been doing the research is just the amount of architecture that's been lost, just knocked down in the 50s and 60s by the corporation or whoever was in charge at the time in their wisdom. But just alone in Cast a Cold Eye, you discover that the Duke Street prison's gone, completely knocked down. There's I've suddenly just forgotten the name of the hotel, actually. The St. Enoch's Hotel, sorry, that's the one, which again was modelled on St Pancras Hotel in London. It was a beautiful building, but was obviously knocked down in the 70s and replaced, no offence to the architects, by a fairly mundane shopping centre. And, you know, it's just, and even the police station that Dreghorn and McDade operate out of, which is in Turnbull Street, just across from St Andrew's Church and St Andrew's Square, is, you know, as far as I can aware, it's been derelict for as long as, you know, probably a decade or more now, and it just looks as though, as is usual, they're just letting it crumble to the point of, oh, it's you know, it's a danger to safety now, we'll have to knock it down. So it's, yeah, it seems it's quite scandalous that obviously the city, for a city that, you know, ostensibly cares so much about its history and talks so much about its past, it then seems to be the visual representations of its past are just being washed away for, you know, in the pursuit of profit, I assume. Sorry, I'm getting all sort of like,
I mean, we were
Morrison, I'll change things.
we were actually having a chat about that before you joined us, Robbie, and I think we'll talk about Glasgow as well as a setting maybe later on. I think that's really interesting. But first, Craig, what can you tell us about the Devil's Playground? Because it's quite a different book.
It is a new departure for me as well. The Devil's Playground is set in Golden Era Hollywood, 1927, just at that point when silence were giving way to talkies, which was an absolutely massive cultural shift. And it's about the greatest horror movie ever made, also called The Devil's Playground, which has already got the reputation of being a cursed production. And then the leading lady is found dead under mysterious circumstances. And Hollywood being Hollywood at that time, it's the studio's fixer, not the police, who is sent in to investigate this death. And as fixers did at the time, she covered up anything embarrassing to the studio. Unfortunately, she discovers that it wasn't suicide as they thought, but murder. So basically, the studio and she has become, accessories after the fact, and she is then charged with getting to the truth as to what actually happened to Norma Carlton. But it also cuts to the late 1960s and a film historian trying to track down the supposedly last surviving print of The Devil's Playground.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting idea, and the way that it develops is fascinating. Let's start with the list. It's interesting to have the McHugh mix because we've got a former debut prize winner. Is that right, Robbie?
Yeah, I won the debut prize with my first novel, Edge of the Grave.
Yeah, and Craig, you've won the McIlvanney Prize previously, twice, I think.
I have, yes, twice. Yeah.
And Calum, we spoke to you about being on the debut prize shortlist, and now you're going for the double by being on the McIlvanney Prize. Let's start with you, Calum. What does it mean to be shortlisted on this prize?
It's crazy. It's quite surreal. Like, I think seeing the long list and seeing all these, big names. I didn't really think I would get to the final four, to be honest with you. I thought it was, yeah.
It was a really impressive long list. I think you're right.
For sure,
Robbie, what yourself? What does it mean to you?
Well, it's my second it's my second nomination for my second novel, so it's probably all downhill from now, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, I think it's great, and it's great to be listed along with three great writers and stuff. So I'm delighted. In fact, I'm going for a festival haircut straight after this. My haircut, get some Botox, get my lips done. I'll be looking like Ken from Barbie by the time the award ceremony starts.
So we can have a before and after picture. We've got it here now and see what it's like. And
I
Craig,
still don't think it'll make me look any better.
and Craig, what does it mean to you? And practically, what does it mean when you've won it?
Well, I think it raises the profile. One thing I have to say is that bloody Scotland, their press and publicity department are absolutely superb. And if you win, you get, as Robbie knows from his experiences, where you get this fantastic nationwide coverage. But it's, I think, to win, you know, the other two guys have been talking about the long list. The long list this year was daunting. It was amazing. And I think what it means is, you know, to be nominated for, just to get on the shortlist for the McIlvanney is, I don't know, it's like Brazilian footballer of the year, because, you know, the bar is so high in Scotland. And, you know, if you look at the long list, we had Ian Rankin, Val McDermott, you know, established names, up and coming names like obviously Calum and Robbie. And I think that's the thing about the Scottish crime writing scene, is it's very, very dynamic, and, you know, it's evolving all the time. You know, I don't think anyone can sort of rest on their laurels. So because there's new voices, new ways of exploring the genre. So just being on the shortlist for the prize is, you know, it's just fantastic. You know, it makes you know, when it does the self-confidence a bit of good. And, you know, writers are not famed for being overly endowed with self-confidence. Yeah.
And I'm also interested, particularly since you've all written books in Glasgow at one time or another, whether it's these ones or previous ones, what William McIlvanney himself, kind of, is he an inspiration? I know, Robbie, you've got a quote from the Papers of Tony Veitch at the very beginning of your books. I'm presuming he is an inspiration to you, but I wanted to ask all of you,
yeah,
starting with Robbie, what, you know, McIlvanney's writing means.
Oh, definitely. Like he was probably the first, and I know McIlvanney didn't view himself as a crime writer in any ways. He was just a brilliant writer. But certainly, as someone who was younger and grown up reading crime fiction, but I always thought, you know, even in my teens, or younger, you always thought, well, all crime fiction is kind of set in America, or, you know, that sort of hard-boiled detective, or that, you know, it's kind of thriller that writes, but also gives you a social commentary and a portrait of the city. And he was the first Scottish writer, obviously, I found using the crime genre to actually, you know, explore what he wanted to say about the city. And as I say, he would never have thought of himself as actually writing a crime novel as he did it, I think. And apart from that, he is just, you can pick up one of his books and read a paragraph or read a sentence and just go, I might as well just give up right now. You know, he's just such a brilliant writer, which is why I used that quote. I'm probably not getting it word for word, but for the first book, it's as if Glasgow couldn't keep the wryness out of its smile, even at the edge of the grave. I just thought it captured something about, you know, Glasgow's mentality and the gallows humour. No, yeah, wow. I'm impressed myself then. I'm surprised. Usually I forget everything.
But what about yourself, Craig? I mean, was McIlvanney an inspiration to you?
Yes, I think a fellow traveller, if you know what I mean. I think what Robbie was saying, I think, is very true. That, and I always feel pompous when I say this, but not so much a crime writer, but a writer who happens to write crime. And, you know, a lot of his fiction was just an exploration of character, and it's the character of individuals and the character of a place and a time. And I think that's something, he sits there with other authors who instilled in me that enthusiasm for having a location as a character, really nailing the character of a place, and also telling a human story, and it just happens to follow the arc of a crime story.
I think, thinking what you said, Robbie, when I was growing up on my dad's bookshelves, the only Scottish writers would have been a collection of Burns, an unread Walter Scott, and a Laidlaw or the Big Man, or one of McIlvanney's finest. So he really did reach into homes, which a lot of Scottish writers had yet to do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And just to echo something Craig was, I think about, to go back about the long list and the short list. It's Craig was saying, obviously we were saying William McIlvanney didn't view himself as a crime writer, and obviously all the books on the long list were, a brilliant showcase for Scottish crime writing, but beyond that, they're just a brilliant showcase of Scottish writing, I think, and it's and that's what counts. I think it's the writing. The genre element of it is, I'm a big
secondary,
secondary in many ways, because it's just good writing. I think a good story is a good story, no matter what genre you label it with,
That's an interesting point. And Calum, what about you? Are you a reader of McIlvanney?
So I read Laidlaw after I got longlisted, because I felt I should, and I was blown away by it, and I was kind of kicking myself that I hadn't read him before, because I think if I read it however many years ago, it would have been like a big influence on my writing. And because I feel like anyone who reads Laidlaw now would probably assume that I was already a big fan. I feel that link is there. But yeah, I picked up, it was what, the 70s, was it? It was published in, and it's just really fresh. Like Robbie said, every line is gold, like the actual sentence by sentence is brilliant. His writing is great, so yeah.
They could have been written yesterday almost, it's like all the great.
Yeah, certainly.
Graham Greene as well was another favourite of mine. The prose is just like McIlvanney. It's just so fresh and so powerful and concise and elegant. Makes me wish I was, enough to aim for that.
I think that's interesting, Calum, because I would have thought that you'd read him, but I think that just shows the reach of McIlvanney and the influence of McIlvanney kind of almost going through other writers and spreading through other writers, that even if you haven't read it yourself,
definitely. I know Robbie was kind of saying about how, hard-boiled crime, it seems like it's an American thing, but then you pick up that book and he's written and it's set in Glasgow, and I had that same kind of moment realization, but with the Cutting Room by Louise Welsh. Gave me that same kind of eye-opening moment of it was doing the same kind of hard-boiled. It was, it was glamorous, it was seedy, it was doing all these things, but it was in a location that I knew really well. And so I think obviously, the kind of Laidlaw, McIlvanney stuff is just filtering through everything,
I think
it's like DNA. It's he laid a strand of DNA through Scottish crime writing, I think. And
I think in some ways it's like the way you always, if you're speaking about crime fiction, sort of American crime fiction, you always go back to Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler, who we should probably mention, seeing as Denise is the new Raymond Chandler. That you could have read many other books without having read Hammett and Chandler, but they would have influenced everybody all go through from, Michael Connolly, James Elroy, all the more recent ones. It's like, it's in the DNA, as Craig probably put it more concisely, actually.
That's interesting as well, because Craig, your book almost feeds into that Americana noir side of things as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think Yeah, I'll try to be brief here because I get very boring on the subject. But there were amazing silent movies being made that used German expressionism, because so many Germans had escaped the rise of Nazism and had come to Hollywood, and German expressionism worked really, really well obviously in horror, and some of the greatest horror movies, and movies like Metropolis were great examples of this. But these directors sort of drifted, we talk about DNA, that German expressionist DNA drifted into noir, because they start, people like Fritz Lang started to make film noir, and film noir is the natural extension of German expressionism. So I ended up in 1927 Hollywood through two routes: through my love of movies and through my fascination with noir fiction, and they sort of came together there, and it is a unique environment and a unique time to write about, and just the very definition of noir. But interestingly, we've been talking about Glasgow. When I first came up with the idea of writing the Lennox series, I was trying to find somewhere to set them. Now, I used to live next to Glasgow, but I didn't really think about setting anything in Glasgow. But we're talking about it being an American tradition. I thought, what's the most American city in Europe? Just about it. And Glasgow sort of leapt to the front of the queue because of the architecture. You were talking about the architecture, that a lot of which was wiped out. A lot of the architecture of Glasgow was being put up at the same time as the brownstones on the east coast of the States. So architecturally, it had that look. But I think what noir needs always is a smart mouth. And I think Glasgow, with Hollywood, have got that, because that's what it trades on. But Glasgow was a natural location for me for noir fiction, and I think it goes back to William McIlvanney and whatnot. I think the sardonic, dry wit lends itself to that almost American wisecracking.
And Calum, did you choose did you choose Glasgow just because you knew it, or because partly of this tradition that it has, and for the reasons that Craig mentioned?
I mean, I've written like quite a few things set in Glasgow because it's like my familiar surrounding. It's a city that I love. I lived there for about 10 years. Squeaky Clean in particular is because I wanted to base it on the car wash that I worked in Bell Street. So I did it. I just said it there, and I wanted people to talk like people talked. And one of the characters, Sean, who's the boss who runs the place, is loosely based on my boss who works there. You can go and meet him, and you can wash your car if you like. He's still there. Because he was just quite a character, and I always wanted to write about him, and so like it naturally I just put it there, without too much thought to the kind of noir stuff. But I have always felt I think just the raininess, the griminess, the sense of humor, the despair, like it's all there in Glasgow, and it has both this kind of glamorous side to it, and the kind of seedy underbelly thing. It has lots of different faces, and a lot of them work for noir.
And the smart mouth that Craig was saying, the book's full of
yeah
as well. And just while we're on it, setting it in real places, has your boss or your ex-boss read it? Does he know that he's represented in the book?
I gave him a copy, but I've not been back. I don't. He's not like a massive reader, but he like loves like Sopranos and stuff like that. He's really into like gangster films and TV shows. So I think he would like it. I like to think that he wouldn't even recognize himself, to be honest with you.
Be able to buy that car wash soon with your royalties, Calum.
Yeah, probably.
Become a car wash magnate, sort of best-selling author.
Have my books on the wall. That'd be great.
And while we're talking about real people, your central detective is Alison or Ali McCoist. And I was wondering, did you consider that might be what the feedback from that would be?
Not in the first draft, no. I just thought it was kind of funny. What happened? I was needing a name for my detective, and my friend, who's a big Rangers fan, used to have a goldfish called Coisty, named after Ali McCoist. And that just happened to pop into my head at that moment. I thought I'll just use that. Then I got to thinking it's kind of a funny name for a detective in Glasgow, and then decided to go the whole hog and call her Alison McCoist, because I wanted her to have this link with Davy. Davy's always grumbling about customers doing car wash jokes to him. So I thought, well, then Ali will have this thing about people making fun of her name, and it's like a nice wee connection between the two of them. And I'm from East Kilbride, and so is Ali McCoist. He's a hometown hero. My grandma was an absolute huge Ali McCoist fan, so there's all these nice things, and I thought I'll just go for it, and it ended up going all the way to publication. I thought maybe at some point it would get removed, but he knows about it, and he's fine.
He does know about it, yeah.
He does, yeah. I was interviewed in The Sun, and they got in touch with him to let him know.
Bang goes your royalties, Calum. That you'll not be able to buy the car wash anymore, because the next thing you owe me the use of my name. No, I'm only joking. But
I think as long as she doesn't start playing football at any point, I'm good.
You have to have that.
And Robbie,
penalty.
Did you think I'm writing in a tradition here when you were writing The Edge of the Grave in the previous novel? Do you think, this is the tradition of McIlvanney and others?
I didn't, not consciously, although I'm aware that when I was writing it, I wanted it to be a realistic, or as realistic a portrayal of a city as you can get in fiction. But at the same time, I did want it to have a little tinge of hard-boiled fiction or the whole gangster movies of the 1930s and all the film noir stuff that Craig was talking about. So probably I just love that stuff so much I didn't think too much about it. At one point, I do remember when I was quite early on writing, at one point I suddenly realised, oh, my detectives, they'll be wearing trench coats and fedoras and stuff like real heroes. I hadn't really thought too much about it, and I probably hadn't really considered any where McIlvanney came in that respect, purely because I would never have thought to be attempting to, you would never compare yourself to him or any of that sort of or anything like that. So yeah, yes and no is a useless answer to answer your question.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys agree, but I think these things, you've got all of these influences that work on you, and these tones and moods that you have in your books. But when you're writing, you're not thinking about it. I don't think you consciously try, you don't think, all right, this is hard-boiled writing, or or this is going to be very atmospheric, this bit. I often say that I think writing is a very subconscious thing. I think the more you get into it, because writing about Glasgow in the 30s, for example, or Hollywood in the 20s, I think you start to live in it in your head, and it's almost automatic. It just, you're there and you're not thinking about style, you're not thinking about genre, you're just walking through a landscape, I think.
No, I would agree. I mean, you're just trying to tell the best story you can, and
yes,
and in some ways you're just trying to bring it to life. And I was also thinking, like, there's quite a lot of real life characters in my books, such as like Chief Constable Percy Sillitoe and Maggie McIver, who opened up the barras, and just quirky characters that I wanted, real life characters that I wanted to put in that you maybe wouldn't get in your regular history books or anything. I wanted to try and but who were a huge part of Glasgow life and Glasgow tradition and the legend of Glasgow. Even the barras and the barrowlands are legendary. So you think, yeah, I'd like to get. So I think I was more intent in trying to bring it to life. Not necessarily 100% historically accurate, but at least enough that people would believe it. I hate using the word because I always get it wrong, but verisimilitude is what I'm aiming for, rather than complete, 100% accuracy, if that makes sense. And while you want to think, yeah, I loved hard-boiled fiction and all those thrillers, and while I kind of want it to be in that tradition, but at the same time, I kind of don't want it to be in that condition, because you can do something that's hopefully new and original and adds something fresh to it, hopefully.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's interesting, I'm going to misquote him, but John le Carré, because everybody said about, oh, this is obviously authentic, this is how the spy world must be, and of course it isn't, it's fiction. And he said, my job isn't to be authentic, my job is to be credible. And I think that's important, that you create a world as accurate as possible, but it's more that the readers can believe in it. They find it a credible world.
Did you say that, Calum, about the car washing world? That people who have done that job as you have, it's more about capturing the verisimilitude, as Robbie says, rather than the accuracy, which is probably
I mean, I just wanted to put in enough kind of detail to make it feel real. Like, so anyone reading it will feel like, oh, that must be what it's like to wash a car. Like you can imagine. Yeah, it's not like being a spy, so it's not like it's much more relatable. But yeah, I think it's just you get enough almost mundane detail to kind of build the image so that it feels real, and it was when I had obviously when earlier drafts was mostly just car wash stuff. So when I started kind of punching, it was that stage where it was like, is it a crime novel or is it just guys chatting?
Yeah,
for like 100 pages. So I so when I got more into the police procedural stuff, and I also I don't know anything about that, so I had to speak to some people and read some books. But when it came to that, I was kind of like, what I really want is just the kind of small mundane details to make it feel right, as opposed to it being 100%. This is how an investigation runs. Because I mean, I've got like Ali McCoy's running about doing whatever by herself, and I think a lot of the stuff she does is probably illegal in some way or another, because it's just kind of flying by the seat of her pants, surveilling people without permission and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't really come up.
I think it's really well, like, using the torn t-shirts as rags. What shocked me more than I think the violence was how filthy some people's cars get.
Oh, it's disgusting, man. I used to always be like I cannot fathom how gross it is. But I didn't drive then. I didn't have a car. Now I have a car. I have 2 children, and my car is disgusting, and I fully understand it.
And Robbie, one of the things I love about Edge of the Grave is that history aspect, is the kind of detail that you go into about the gangs, the different areas, all of that stuff. It feels like there's quite a bit of research has gone into it. Is that the case? Or did you just know?
Oh, yeah. Yes, no, over the years, plenty of research, plenty of just wading through, Percy Sillitoe's memoirs, history books, anything you can get. And obviously, from my own family history as well, which my dad compiled, has been lots of little stuff. I use Jimmy Dreghorn, the lead character. Some of his background is based on my grandfather, who used to box for Sir Ivor Colquhoun, whose family owned much of Loch Lomond. Back in those days, used to have stables of athletes. My grandfather used to box for him. He also worked in black squads in the shipyard all along the River Clyde. But the one wee detail, and this was my dad who put it in the family history that he wrote up, was that when in the shipyards, when you were doing welding, this was before there was anything like safety goggles or anything. So every now and again, sparks would go in the workers' eyes. And obviously that's just like a tiny, tiny piece of metal. So what was, my grandfather was the eye man in the shipyard. So they would go to my grandfather with this because it got painful. And he had developed a way of just sharpening a matchstick. And I mean, it makes my eyes water. And turning the worker's eyelid out with the matchstick and removing the little piece of metal. Now, you wouldn't have found that. It'd be unlikely to find that in a history book anywhere, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also lucky in that my other half, Deborah, is a Marvel Comics trained editor and is big in social history and quite, you know, her even though she was born in London, her mum was from Glasgow, her dad was a Geordie, but she's been fascinated by the social history of Glasgow as well, and quite a lot of, you know, so a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of research and sort of input and insight behind the scenes where she's gone off and, you know, and found me interesting or another angle that I wouldn't have possibly picked up on myself, you know. Like some of the suffragette stuff that was in the first book, it was in there, you know, she was push, you should develop that, you should get it, you know, you should bring it to the fore more. So it's like, yeah, probably any amount of depth or anything like that is probably down to her. I'm just all the car chases and punch-ups. It's left to me, that's all it would be probably.
And Craig, how do you approach researching your book, The Devil's Playground? Where do you even begin?
Well, to be honest, a lot of it was there beforehand because, you know, I'm a huge fan of film and the history of film, but also, you know, again, as Robbie said, there's always social history behind these things, and just the sudden explosion of Hollywood at that time, quite simply because after the First World War, the Danish, German, Italian, French film industries that had been leading the world were wiped out, and I just find the history of Hollywood and what the impact that it still has on our lives today. I find that fascinating, and just love the stories and because it was it was a world completely unto itself with its own rules, and you know, at that time it was incredible that there were more people of color and there were more women working in every level of filmmaking than there are today, you know, in the 1920s as opposed to the 2020s. So it was just a fascinating time to explore. And, you know, there were a lot of people that are icons in our culture who were absolute monsters, and sort of delving into that. Charlie Chaplin, my God, what a monster. Yeah, and you know, and his brother was even worse. Yeah. And it just the power and that these obviously predominantly men had, and the abuse of that power. I found that just amazing to research, and it helps you. You know, I always say that writing about the past helps me understand the present. So, you know, Harvey Weinstein wasn't an aberration. He was just the last of a long line, a long tradition. So I just found it amazing. But I really do get into the research, I have to say. I love researching the fashions and the cars and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And then that's what gives
I've just had an interview walking around wearing like evening suits and stuff like this and fedoras and checking them all out in 1930s style in a full length mirror.
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, I don't know if I can bring it over. I bought this phone when I bought this phone when I was researching it, and I tried using it, and it's connected, but no one uses the landline anymore. So.
No, it's useless, yeah.
And you do have a couple of fedoras over your shoulder, so I think Robbie.
I do, yes. I'm a great fedora wearer myself.
Yeah. Possibly even a Panama hat, I spy.
Oh yeah, probably, yes, yeah. And there's a cowboy hat as well. Yeah, I like hats.
We've all got one of them, though, haven't we?
And the idea of the lost film, Craig, that's something about that rings a bell with me. Was it based on a real situation that there's some kind of cursed film that's out there somewhere?
Well, there are so many lost movies because the silver nitrate that films were made on, to describe them as flammable is an understatement. They would spontaneously combust. If the temperature got above a certain level, they would just catch fire. And they burned in a way, they had enough captive oxygen in the film that you could put them in a bucket of water and they would still burn underwater. So that's what silent movies were filmed on. And that's why I can't remember what the percentage is. It's only about 10% of silent movies have survived. And I do reference some of the big studio fires. Studios were always going up and archives lost. And London After Midnight with Lon Chaney is one of these. My researcher says that he's also been offered a vast amount of money to find out. So that is that's a lost movie that no one has ever been able to get a print from.
And let's move on to talking about
famous.
Sorry, Robbie, on you go.
Oh, really different because I think it was in the 50s, but there's the famous Orson Welles version of Dead Cam that is locked up in a vault somewhere, never to be seen. Obviously, Dead Cam was based on a Cornell Woolrich novel or something like that, I think.
Right. I don't know that one. No, that's interesting.
Yeah, for legal problems, obviously, I didn't burn them, but for legal problems, it's been locked up for never seen the light of day.
Wow. Yes, yeah. It's interesting with a lot of the movies, they haven't fallen into public. Some of them haven't fallen into public domain, and it's because they can be tied up in copyright issues and that kind of thing. But no, it was fascinating to write about.
I want to move on to Bloody Scotland itself and hear about your experiences and what you're kind of looking forward to. Calum, is this your first? Have you been before?
Yeah, it's my first. I've never been before, so I'm kind of looking forward to the whole weekend. The torchlight procession, I'm a little bit worried about carrying a massive flaming torch, but yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to the whole weekend. I'm going to see
it. It could be a way to get rid of your rivals, though, couldn't it? So just watch.
You probably easily make it look like an accident, yeah.
Well, I've got to be honest. I took part in one of the torchlight parades, and I was talking to Michael Ridpath, the author, and at one point he was slapping me heartily on the back. I thought, oh, he was actually putting my jacket out because one of an ember had come down on me.
No.
Wow. Yeah, it always struck me as a kind of dangerous idea, but there you are. Robbie, what are you looking forward to about it?
Well, obviously I've been twice. The first time I went, I actually won an award. The second time I'm going, I've been nominated for one. So as far as I'm concerned, Bloody Scotland's the best crime writing festival out there. I don't care if you all call me a big sook or not. No, I'm really looking forward to it. I find that it's a really relaxing. It's great to meet, your fellow authors, and it's always great to meet the readers, of course, because that's where you always think without the readers, then there's, we wouldn't be sitting here doing that. They're the most important part of the process ultimately towards the end of it. So it's great to meet them and to get their takes on, the books you've written and how they've taken to them. I always think writing, because my background is coming from writing comic books, which is, it's a very visual medium. So everything's sort of on the page. The characters are drawn. So the artist has already put it on the page. But what's nice with books is that every reader probably has a different idea of what your character looks like in their head, because they imagine it for themselves, which I think is a wonderful thing. There's no other medium no other medium does that so well. Because I think I was reading Stephen King's On Writing again recently, and he describes it as like a form of telepathy. When you've written your book and it goes out and they're reading it, might be a very delayed form of telepathy, but you're putting your story into your head, and that might be slightly pretentious or not, but I quite like the sound of it. I kind of agree.
I agree with that, because I think it's actually the writer-reader relationship is actually very intimate, because your mind is engaging directly with the reader's mind, and you kind of forget that, because there are all of the steps in publication and that kind of thing. But it is, and so when you Bloody Scotland, when you get to talk to readers, it's great to get feedback and find out what people have got from writing. But the other thing I would say about Bloody Scotland is it is great just to be able to talk with other authors, because it's a strange job, and it's a solitary job. You're on your own, and you sometimes think you're a bit odd, you're a bit strange, and then it's nice to meet other people who
are equally odd.
Are equally
odd. Think you're a bit odd, but are being
yeah, they agree with me. Yeah, you are.
Yeah, being too polite to say it, possibly.
But I mean, as a reader, I love these festivals for that very reason, that you do get to have maybe the burning question that you've had after reading a book answered by the writer themselves. I think that is a huge part of it.
Yes.
I probably suggest perhaps the most important part of it too. And so, in terms of what you're going to, you've all got, Calum, you're going to be on the debut panel there. Craig, are you on anything else, Calum, or is it just that's the one?
No, just the debut panel, and I'm just going to be going to see lots of other stuff.
And Craig, what about yourself? What are you doing at the festival?
It's on the Sunday. I'm on a panel with Liam McIlvanney, I'm delighted to say. So, first time that we'll actually have talked face to face. We've talked, via social media, but of course he's usually on the other side of the world. So it's going to be really nice just to chat away with them.
Yeah. And Robbie, are you attending, and what are you looking forward to in that sense?
Well, I did again, the social side of it's great. There's a few I have to actually, to be honest, I have to go through the brochure a bit more and check it out. I'll be definitely going to see Craig and Liam, however, which I'll be looking forward to that. And I'm on another panel with Grant Morrison, who's a fairly legendary comics writer, and Grant has just written their first novel as well, which is which we're on together. But what's interesting is our novels are wildly different, so it should be an interesting panel, you know. But obviously our background is both in comics, and so I presume we'll be talking about that background, but then talking about the differences between writing for comics and moving into writing for novels, the differences between the medium. So I'm really looking forward to it. It should be great. And of course the prize giving and the torchlit procession, even though I'm now suddenly wary. I'm trying to think, what have I got that's fireproof that I can is also fashionable and fireproof.
Yeah, and what's that new haircut when you get it? You know.
Yeah, no.
And when I spoke to Calum previously, we were discussing how there does seem to be a real camaraderie in the crime writing community, if I can call it that. Is that something that you would all agree with? Craig, let's start with yourself.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think it can be like a self-help group. I was talking about Michael Ridpath going way back. I remember I was having problems. You know, the third book that can sometimes be the one that a lot of people have a problem with the second book, but the third book. But I remember Michael was great, you know, with sage advice on that. And there's always, you know, that's what I was saying, you know, people who share the same challenges, the same problems, or have, you know, and it's very supportive. It's not a competitive environment, if you know what I mean. I think there's a lot of solidarity between writers, generally, crime writers. Obviously, I mean, I've heard stories that historical fiction, you know, they have it in for each other, but I don't believe that.
Steve Buggers, the historical, right?
But no, I've always found it very supportive, and it just nice to be able to talk to someone else who's going through the same experiences at different stages in their career.
And Robbie, is that something you've found as well?
I know, I would definitely. I mean, shoot me for using this phrase, but we're all in it together. Everybody, you know, you understand the good and the bad of the business. Or I'm beginning to learn the good and the bad. I mean, Craig has just given me a little bit of nugget there where he says sometimes you can have problems with the third novel, and I'm like,
I could see your face going, "Oh no."
So it might just be third, fourth, fifth, you know, it could be all of them. I also think, obviously, my background is working in comic books, and there's the same sort of camaraderie amongst the writer and artists and colorists there. So I'd like to think it's just creative communities, for want of a better phrase. Quite often, you know, they're supportive, and they want people to, you know, do well and succeed. I mean, I'm sure there's the odd bad apple here and there, but glad to say I haven't encountered any yet.
And Calum, when we spoke about the debut prize shortlist, you could tell already that all of the shortlisted writers had bonded and, you know, were really kind of supporting each other as well. So have you found quickly that has been the case?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we all met at the programme launch a few months ago, and I've just kind of kept in touch since then. It's really great meeting other people who are just like at the same stage, who have, you know, just had their book out and they're trying to figure out what they're doing next, if they're working on something, or, you know, getting to talk to someone about all this stuff, you know, if you're stuck or not stuck or whatever, you know. It's just that's really nice. Because because it can be kind of solitary, and it's kind of to talk about some of this stuff with someone who isn't in publishing or doesn't write is kind of tricky to explain. I think, you know, the kind of trials and tribulations. It's not easy to describe. So like for people who are already involved in it and understand the kind of the difficulties, and yeah, it's been really good.
Well, I have to say, I could talk to all of you for so much longer, and maybe I will in the future. But for now, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And
Thanks
also,
a lot. Cheers.
the best of luck to all of you in terms of the prize and the future. And do stay tuned, listeners, because I will be talking to Denise Mina about her shortlisted book, The Second Murderer, and most likely a whole lot more. And I'm joined now by the fourth writer on the McIlvanney Prize Shortlist, Denise Mina. Hello, Denise.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really well. Thanks for joining me. And congratulations on making the shortlist.
Oh, I'm astonished.
So before we go any further, I think it'd be nice to give listeners a synopsis on The Second Murderer, your nominated book.
Well, it's The Second Murderer is a Raymond Chandler continuation novel. So the estate asked me if I'd be interested in writing a Philip Marlowe book. And if you don't know Raymond Chandler, he's basically a blue-collar detective in LA in the late 30s, early 40s. He's works on his own. He's got his own value system. He drives around in a car. You know, there's a lot of dames. He fancies everyone. Everyone fancies him. He hasn't got a lot of money. Everyone must be quite smelly. There's a lot of money in LA. There's also a lot of poverty in LA. But I mean, I'm absolutely amazed. For an estate novel to be shortlisted is incredible. And the McIlvanney Prize have been so kind to me because a lot of the times I'm doing things that don't quite fit the usual kind of format, and they're always very open and inclusive to that, you know. So, I mean, to be on the shortlist, I've already won for me because for an estate novel to be on the shortlist is really amazing.
And it's interesting you say that because I think not just the shortlist, but the long list itself shows how inclusive and kind of eclectic crime writing is at the moment. Would you agree with that?
I think not all crime writing is. I'll be honest with you. You know, there are some lists that are very, are you dum-de-dum meeting these beat points? And then there are others like the McIlvanney that are just very, just like really interested in the form and changing the form and broadening the categories of the form. So, I mean, I think the McIlvanney is a bit special.
Yeah, and that's what strikes me looking through the books and talking to the writers is that you've got this real, you know, you've got Robbie Morrison's is kind of historical Glasgow, Calum McSorley's is contemporary modern day, and then you've got another kind of Hollywood set one with Craig Russell's book as well, which we spoke about McIlvanney himself and how we didn't think he would consider himself a crime writer as such, just as a writer, and that's what he touched upon. How do you view do you think of yourself as a crime writer, or is it that categorization for other people to make?
I mean, I think we take these things too seriously. You know, I do, but it's not, you know, I mean, the urge to categorize things, it gives you the theory of evolution, but it also gives you eugenics. So you have to be careful with it. But I mean, ultimately, it's just a tale, you know? And if it makes people feel more comfortable with having an opinion about whether it's good or bad, I'm a crime writer. Do you know what I mean? I think if people think they're reading a crime writer, they're much more entitled, they're much more opinionated, they're like, that's rubbish, this is good, I know. Whereas if you say it's literary writing, people are like, well, maybe it is good, I don't know, I don't have a degree. You know what I mean?
have never thought about it that way, but you're probably absolutely right. I'm in a comfort zone here, and therefore, but I think what Bloody Scotland does in general, but the McIlvanney Prize seems to do, is almost play around with that. So you've got novels that could be horror, that could be literary, you know, in another sense, and says, well,
or sci-fi. Some of them are
yeah.
sci-fi. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it is becoming a kind of alternative. You know, in the way that like the Gordon Byrne has become a bit of an alternative booker.
Yeah.
When the categorizations or the admin of art becomes so rigid that it no longer reflects what the original intention was. I mean, like in the States, you have some, you know, book prizes that are basically, are you cosplaying the originators of this form?
Yeah.
And you know, that something else always comes in to take the place, and I think McIlvanney's taken a really interesting position.
And I mean, you've won it previously. That's right. Yeah.
I've won it twice.
Well, there you go.
Well, I won it the first time for the long drop, and the second time I didn't really win it. But Amanda Scott said she would share it with all the people on the shortlist because she didn't agree with literary prizes. And everybody else was like, I had a lot of opinions about that, but I was like, that means I can say I've won it twice because that's how cheap I am.
Brilliant, thanks, Amanda. That's fantastic. But that's interesting because I know, speaking to musicians, and there's a lot of obviously music prizes. I think the Mercury was even last night. That some of them are uncomfortable with the idea of prizes for making music. You know, the Scottish Album of the Year Award's a good example. Some people say, don't put my album on that. I don't want to be competitive. But from my point of view, it gets writers into, well, it gets listeners new music, and it gets writers into new readers' hands. That's how I think about it. What do you think?
I think it's really important not to take it too seriously. There's a philosopher called Alistair MacIntyre who wrote a book called After Virtue, and he's very clear about this. And for me, it really cleared it up. And he said, you know, obviously you can't compare, you can't weigh and measure music and say this is 2 degrees better than that music. It's silly. And there's also, you know, the reader response in reading where the person who's reading it brings a prism. So I've read terribly badly written true crime books that were high art because of the prism through which I was reading them at the time. You know, so you can't really measure up, but at the same time, exactly what you're saying, those superstructures of administration are very important so that it becomes a profession and it isn't just a hobby. And it isn't, you don't only hear about people who've got lots of money to promote themselves. And, you know, and you have to, I mean, I've been a judge on lots of prizes, and, you know, and the reason I did that is because I think in the end, although it is a really important marketing tool for lots of people that you wouldn't hear of otherwise.
And I was going to ask you what the practical kind of benefits of winning something like the McIlvanney is. Do you notice it? Yeah,
you notice it in sales. You notice it in the fact that you've got something to talk about other than here's another book that, you know, isn't written by a man. Quite often, you know. You notice it in the way that, you know, I mean, I notice it when I'm looking for people to read, to be honest with you. I will look at somebody and think, well, they've won all that. It can't be shite. They can clearly put a sentence together. Not so much that, you know, this is brilliant or anything like that, just that, you know, they can clearly spin a tale, and I'm not going to invest 500 pages and then it turns out it's just a bunch of old rubbish, you know?
yeah.
So it's a matter of faith. I think it gives you faith in something of it.
And also that's where the importance of a judging panel comes in, because they are hopefully filtering to some extent, you know, and if you...
I'll tell you this, being a judge on a prize with a lot of entries, like 300 entries, the long list, it presents itself because there's a lot of rubbish out there and a lot of badly written rubbish. And I mean, I'm sure you come across it sometimes, but it's really startling when you're reading a book by somebody who can't really write. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? It's really staggering, and you're just kind of like, how did this get published? Oh, you know, so-and-so. Yeah. Oh, how did that really, you know, and these things are actually getting put. Oh, you're somebody's husband, you know. Mm-hmm. And then the long list will often just present itself, and it's like, if you read the whole Booker, if you read a lot of the Booker books, some of them are just garbage. I mean, really word salad nonsense. And the long list is usually really good books that are in this area, you know. So I think it does help you sort of filter those things out a wee bit. Absolutely. I mean, I'm saying that, but I've won prizes, and now had I never won a prize, would I feel that way? Yeah. Do you know? So it's worked for me. It's been a great, you know, it's been a great affirmatory thing for me. But I don't know if I would feel that way if I hadn't won, and maybe I'm kind of justifying my luck. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't feel that way if I hadn't won stuff. I'd think I was too ahead of the game for.
But I mean, as you say, even something like the McIlvanney Prize, which has got such a kind of prestige, I think, even being shortlisted has kind of, you know, will be a thing, I think. And it goes back
massive
that we spoke about with Calum, Craig and Robbie, is that there does seem to be a camaraderie within crime writers that they're really kind of all rooting for each other. It's so lovely. I mean, I spoke to the five of the debut prize list shortlisted people as well, and they were so kind of wanting to promote each other's books rather than their own.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And you know, why can't it be like that? Do you know what I mean? Why should we be vying with one another as if there is only one reader? It's silly.
Yeah.
You know, why can't we be collegiate? Why can't we be lateral? Why can't we be influenced and inspired by people who are alive now?
Yeah.
Why has it always got to be someone who's dead? Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, there's a kind of parsimoniousness to it, that it's the model of genius in the arts, that there can be only one. It's like Highlander, you know, there can only be one good one and everybody else is just a prelude to that. That's absolute nonsense. That's not how we experience art. It is collegiate, and it is, you know, a collective, communal kind of experience. And writing is exactly the same. It's got your name on it, but it is a collective work always, you know. And that's not just the editors and the typesetters. It's also the other writers who say to you, "No, you can do it. Go on, get up on stage." And do you know what I mean? You know, and it's you know, I think that could bleed out from crime writing to other areas of fiction where, you know, it's not a competition to see who's the special boy.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. And other people that you've read, or that the writers that you're influenced by have read. So I was talking about William McIlvanney and his influence as well, and Calum had said, I read Laidlaw once I got on the shortlist because I'd never read any McIlvanney.
Right.
That's really surprising to me, because you can almost feel the genetics, if you like, coming through. But it would have been writers, I suppose, that he would have read who have read McIlvanney, that then that kind of. Do you think that's right? Do you think? And were you a fan of his himself?
McIlvanney?
Yes.
Well, I worked in the Chip, Alistair, so I
Right.
knew who everybody was because I
Yeah.
worked in the bar. So yeah, I mean, I had read Laidlaw and I had loved Laidlaw, but I mean, I think what McIlvanney did is a bit zeitgeisty. That was the genius of Laidlaw.
Yeah.
Was that is how people speak in Glasgow, particularly at that time. You know, there's a lot of out the side of the mouth. Everyone thought they were in a Bogart movie.
Yeah.
You're a bit younger than me. You don't really remember this, but it was a real kind of model, that kind of Humphrey Bogart thing. It was a real model for blue collar guys who had an internal life to express it through this detective guy medium. So that's really what, because you know, McIlvanney's life was not crime writing. He was just a writer. He was a literary writer. And I think that was what he really bostled, was that genius. That, you know, a lot of the language that we use in Glasgow, janitor, you don't hear that anywhere else. It's not an affectation. We say janitor. A lot of that stuff is from Chandler, from Hammett, from those kind of you know, noir kind of American movies and stuff. So I mean, I think, you know, that you know, shooting the cuffs and all that I think all of that stuff is what McIlvanney put in Laidlaw, and it is just in the culture. It's just seeped through the culture. So sometimes people look as if they're doing McIlvanney, but they're not. They're just representing the culture they see around them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I was also working in bars and restaurants from a young age, and I do remember the guys who on like a Friday, Saturday would be suited and booted. You know, they'd been working all week, but would be absolutely immaculate going out. And there was that kind of swagger with the shoulders going on as they came through.
Yeah, you know, and you know, not being embarrassed that you're working class, that's a thing to be proud of. You know, you don't need to apologize. I mean, actually, a lot of middle class people pretended to be working class. When I moved up from London, it was the height of Thatcher. I couldn't take it anymore. And in London, everyone pretended to be middle class. And in Glasgow, everyone pretended to be working class. And I thought, well, this is a better lie. It's a more laudable social fiction.
You've maybe answered this, but we were speaking about why Glasgow seems to be such a great setting for crime, but it may touch into all those things you've just mentioned. I mean, you've obviously written novels in Glasgow yourself. Why do you think it is such a kind of a city which almost embraces noir, if you like?
It is quite a noir city. It is very dark. It has the darkness and the light. You know, there's a broad you know, social divide. I mean, we don't talk about the social divide in Glasgow. I think that's a really Protestant thing, and the reason for that are social divisions. And I think one of the reasons for that is because people are rightly embarrassed about the, bifurcation in social income, because it's the poorest place in Britain, and also there's a lot of money there. Do you know what I mean? And but I mean, I think that it is about tradition and the way people see themselves. I mean, I one of the things that always strikes me about Glasgow is everyone you meet is the central character.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know how to unpack that.
Yeah.
Like, you never meet anyone in Glasgow who's like a side character or a.
They're the star of their own movie.
I'm in my own biopic. Everyone's in their own
biopic. That's true, yeah.
There is but that is kind of like your life matters, and I think that is about socialism, and I think it is about the legacy of socialism. Is there are no sideshows, and that is what noir depends upon. Is each scene stands in and of itself. When you read Hammett and you read Chandler, maybe because they were so drunk, their scenes don't fit together very well, and they're almost Brechtian in that each scene stands on its own. And I think that is a very Glasgow attitude, as each Friday stands on its own in and of itself, not to be adjudicated by another day.
No, that is really, absolutely. That was the weekend, and then I've got the next one, and it's a completely different thing. And whatever happened there might be reasons why I can't remember what happened, but I leave that in the past.
Yeah. And I think also it's very beautiful. That's another thing. It's like it's startling and unseen, which place is so important in noir, and Glasgow still feels like people are surprised by Glasgow all the time.
Yeah, because I think it was Robbie who was talking about the importance of architecture, and not just the stuff that's still there, but the stuff that's been taken away as well.
Void in space, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but how did you approach then setting the second murderer in LA, another noir city, in a different way, but it's got the darkness and the light that you talk about. Did you have to research the place? Did you have to really kind of understand the place to do it?
Well, it's so interesting because the place isn't there anymore. I mean, I spent time in LA, but that's not LA anymore.
Yes.
And they flattened Bunker Hill and all that. It's so well documented, and I wanted to take that character to places that he had never been, and there are so many areas of LA that he never went to. So he visited Bunker Hill very briefly. Actually, Chandler lived in Bunker Hill at one point when he was young, and he never, he was racist, Chandler, so he never went into, he never spent time particularly with people of color, as friends or as informants. But there's loads of documentary evidence of that's available online, because I wrote it during lockdown. So people kept putting movie cameras in cars and driving around LA at that time. It was all silent. Right. But it's not difficult to find out what the layout was or what the history is, because there's so much available. There are brilliant maps of every place anything happens in a Chandler book available online, because there's so many kind of real aficionados. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it wasn't hard to document at all, but it was kind of the atmosphere that was quite hard to sort of get.
And was that daunting? As you say, there's a lot of aficionados, Philip Marlowe fans. Was that daunting to take that on?
Everything's daunting to take on. Yeah, it was daunting. It was daunting. But, I wrote Hellblazer in 2005, and that was more daunting because, people who like Chandler are one thing, but comic book fans are another thing. And so you think, well, you're either going to hide behind the sofa for the rest of your life, or you're just going to do it. I mean, I think some people didn't like the fact that he listened to women, that he spent time with gay people, because he was very homophobic. I don't think the character's homophobic. I think Chandler was homophobic. And also, it is quite a radical take on it. It's not a straightforward take on it at all. And I made him the man I wanted him to be. And there was a review in the Washington Post, and I think the person said, I can't get on board with this at all. And it was quite a negative review, and I sent an email to my publishers. They were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, hope you're okay." And I sent them an email saying, well, you know, there's always going to be some people have this, but you know what? I've got the mic now, so fuck them. And that is it. I've got the
mic. In that way.
You're entitled to your opinion. Sit down and shut up.
Yes. Tell your opinion, it just happens to be the wrong one.
Who said that? Who was it said that?
I'm not sure. I'm sure I've heard Mark Kermode saying something like that.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
His film reviews. So going to Bloody Scotland, what are your experiences of Bloody Scotland, and are you going to be there this year? Are you attending?
I am going to be there on the Saturday at doing an event with Karen Smirnoff, who's written a continuation novel for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, it's brilliant. And I wrote the Millennium Trilogy as a series of graphic novels, so we'll have loads to talk about there. And I'm also going to be there for the prize giving and the Walk of Fire. I don't know if you've seen pictures of the Walk of Fire, have you?
Well, we were talking about this with the guys earlier, and Craig Russell said that he was doing it previously and he thought another writer was patting him on the back, but he was putting out flames because his coat had caught fire. So it looks, and I know Calum in particular is quite worried about it. So, yeah.
Well, I hope this goes, well, I wouldn't say to Calum, but it doesn't seem safe, I'll be honest with you. So I was there with Val and Ian one year, and there was a kid who was really out of control. And his mum was going, oh, don't do that. And he was swinging his fire around everywhere. But I mean, I will never mess up. I will never pass up the opportunity to self-immolate. So I'm definitely going to. But it's, you start at the top, and you've all got things. You start at the top of the hill, and you think, what is the point of this? It's not even done. By the time you get to the bottom of the hill with a pipe band, I must say, it is pitch black. You can see nothing but fire looking back behind you. There's a pipe band there, and it is a really amazing experience. You know,
Seems like you're all ready to march on England.
Oh, bring out the monster! Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Bring the monster out.
I thought it was just the writers. So the general public also gets access to fire. They
pay to do it. So you look up, and it's a very narrow exit from the castle, right? You look back up, and it is a river of fire going all the way up to the castle in the pitch black. Wow. It's an amazing sight, and the sun goes down as you walk down the hill. So by the time you get to the bottom, you're in the pitch dark, looking back at a river of fire with a brilliant pipe band playing. I mean, I would follow a pipe band into hell, to be honest with you. And I love the pipe so much. And but it is an amazing sight. It is an absolutely amazing sight, and to be at the front of it is really incredible. Do you know what I mean? To be at the front of it with your pals, it feels like someone's put this on for us, because we all really love danger, pipes, and dark.
And I've had nights out in Stirling on a Friday night. That does seem like a dangerous kind of combination.
Wee bit less fire, maybe.
Denise, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Alistair, it's an absolute pleasure.
And the McIlvanney Prize winner will be announced on Friday the 15th, so look out for that. I hope you've enjoyed these Bloody Scotland podcasts, and you'll check out all the writers and their books. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.